Hit record on this. So this is recording, but don't say anything yet. Okay. And then we're gonna record on this. Okay, so now the screen is recording. Okay. Should we do like a fancy intro?
Sure.
Okay. Hello. I am John Beckman, Professor John Beckman, Dr. John Beckman, the father of Sid, the transgenic mother of Senior, hostess with the mostest. This is my wonderful daughter, Elaine. Say hi, Elaine.
Hello.
Elaine is doing homeschool, and we are going to teach Elaine kid biology, day one. Day one, kid biology. Are you excited, Elaine?
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing you need to learn about biology is how the things that build organisms. So just in a sense of like if you wanted to build a car, you would need to learn about the pieces of the car. Does that make sense? So if you want to understand about living organisms, you need to understand the pieces of the organisms that come together to build that complex living creature. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So first we need to talk a little bit about chemistry. Okay. So chemistry is what all the universe around us is made of. Chemistry is essentially the study of all the stuff that's around us. Like, what is it made out of? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And so the famous idea is, imagine you have like a block of gold. Imagine you have a block of gold. Okay. And you take like a knife or something, or like something that you can cut the gold with, and you cut the gold in half. Okay. And now you have two sort of like blocks of gold. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. That makes sense, right? Yes. Okay. Then the next idea or like thought experiment is, what if you keep doing this process? What if you kept doing this over and over and over and over, cutting each of these blocks continuously in half, over and over and over and over? Would there ever be a point at which it would be so small you could not cut it in half again?
Yes.
Okay. And if you looked at a microscope at that level, what would you see?
The gold, basically.
But what's the smallest, what is the gold made of? Does that make sense?
Yeah. What
is like the smallest thing that at some point you would not be able to cut it in half anymore? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That idea?
Mm-hmm.
That thing is called an atom. An atom. Have you been taught that yet in school? No. Okay. So an atom is the smallest unit of matter. Okay, so matter is a word that means like all the physical thing around us that you can touch, or the air that you breathe, that's matter. The physical stuff of Earth that we live in and live around, that's matter. And matter is made of atoms. So again, the gold example, you keep cutting it in half. Eventually, you will get to the point where there are two gold atoms, and you could cut the two gold atoms in half. But at this point, you can't cut the atom in half anymore. Yeah. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, there are some complicated situations where you can break atoms apart, but this is essentially the smallest unit of matter is an atom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now we understand what an atom is. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you need to understand how atoms are built. Okay. So inside of atoms, there's essentially a nucleus. Nucleus is a word that you see a lot in science. It kind of means the center.
Basically the center.
Yeah, basically the center. Okay. And so in the nucleus of the atom, there are kind of like these little balls that are called protons and neutrons. Okay. And then there are things that are very small that fly around the nucleus, which are called electrons. Electrons. Okay, and have you heard like electrical charge? Have you you've heard a little bit about charge? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you know about charges?
That basically electric charge is like, you have to like basically get electric, basically.
Okay, well, the thing that you need to know about charge is that opposites attract. Okay, this is like a physical property of charge. Opposites attract. So negative things, guess what they like to bind to? What's the opposite of negative?
Positive.
Positive. Okay, so if you have things like this, they like to interact with each other and stay close. If you have the same charge, like a negative and a negative, guess what they do?
Separate?
They separate apart. Very good. Okay. So in the nucleus, protons are positive. They have a positive charge. And electrons are negative.
Okay.
So electrons fly around the nucleus, but they never want to leave. Guess why they never want to leave?
Because they don't want to be like separate.
They don't want to be separated from the protons. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the negative charge in the electrons causes them, they fly around, but they never want to leave. They always want to stay there next to the protons.
Okay.
Neutrons are neutral. They don't have any charge.
Okay.
So they just kind of sit there and they make it either heavy or light.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So all atoms, there's different types of atoms. Okay. So different types of atoms. Okay. But they all look like this.
Okay.
They all look like this. The only difference is some atoms have more protons or more neutrons and more or less electrons.
Okay.
So it's just a different amount, a different size in the nucleus, and a different number of electrons that are flying around.
Okay.
And that makes different atoms. Okay. Now let me pull up something called the periodic table of elements. Let me grab this. We'll get a screenshot of this. And we will bring it into. Okay, these are the different types of atoms. And you've probably heard of some of these, okay? You've probably heard of oxygen,
Yes.
right? You've heard of oxygen because we breathe
Yes.
oxygen. Okay, and you might have heard of, what would be one that you had heard of? Probably some metals. Nickel. Have you ever heard of nickel or copper?
I've heard of copper.
Or zinc? Yeah. So these are metals.
Okay.
Okay. And some of these are gases. Okay, so like hydrogen.
Yeah.
Hydrogen is a gas. Okay. Helium is a gas. Okay. And in terms of what you need to know right now about the periodic table is just these are all the different types of atoms. And remember that the reason that they're different is based on the differences in heaviness of how many protons or neutrons they have in the nucleus
Okay.
and how many electrons they have. Okay?
Okay.
So the ones that we're really interested in for biology, there's only some of these that we're super interested in. Oh, hang on. My pen is doing weird stuff. Okay, here it is. We're really interested in carbon. Okay. So there's some of these atoms that build living organisms.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so what we need to do is we need to learn the most common elements in living organisms. Carbon, okay, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and hydrogen. And then there's some sulfur. These are kind of the most common biological atoms. So these are the atoms that make up living organisms.
Okay.
And then there are some of these other things that get thrown in, but not very often. Like, is there a lot of gold in your body?
No.
Yeah, there's not a lot of gold in your body. So although gold is an atom, you don't find that very commonly in your body.
Yeah.
But most of us are made, guess what? Have you ever heard, like, most of us are 70% of what? All human organisms or living things are essentially like 70% water.
Water.
Have you heard that?
Yes.
The water
I heard it was 85%.
could be higher. I don't know, something high. We're essentially like bags of water. And guess how you draw water? Water is an oxygen with 2 hydrogens. So this is actually what water looks like. Does that make sense? At the atomic level. Okay, so let's actually get like a water molecule. Let me get a picture of it. So I just pulled it, and it's exactly what I drew, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, here's what you need to know. This is kind of a lot of information. I don't want you to get stressed out, okay? But essentially what you need to know is atoms, here's the take-homes. Atoms are the smallest things
Okay.
Smallest matter.
Smallest matter.
And atoms can combine.
Combine with negative and positive.
Well, hang on. Atoms can combine to build molecules. Okay, so water. So let me ask a question. Okay, so here's a test question. Question. Okay. Is water an atom or a molecule?
Molecule?
Yes. Why do you think so? You're right.
Basically, because it has like oxygen and hydrogen, maybe.
Yes, because it's got two different atoms. So different atoms can come together, and they build different things. And the properties of the different chemicals or molecules that they make are different based on the pieces that you put in them. Just like if you're building like a Lego piece, the different pieces build different things and they move in different ways and you can play with them in different ways. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing with atoms. You have sort of like all these basic atomic building blocks and you can put them together in different ways. And the way in which you put them together creates molecules, and then molecules can later at the next level come together to make more complicated molecules. And so if you ask if we were to finalize the point of this lecture, which is the building blocks of life, if we're to finalize like the take home, living things, living organisms, like things like you and me and plants and trees are made of molecules that come together, and molecules are made of atoms. And you can't go smaller than that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Okay.
Good first lesson. Good job. Okay. Do you have any final words?
No, not really.
Very good. Okay.
Like and subscribe.
Oh, I like that. Very good.